Thanks everyone for coming. So quick introductions. Two people over to my right. We have Liron Cohen. He's our CTO and co-founder of Sosivio. He's been working with Linux systems for over 2 decades. He's worked with some of the world's largest enterprises, working with Linux, security, infrastructure, and Kubernetes. Prior to Sosivio, he was a principal consultant for Kubernetes for Red Hat Israel and Europe. To my right, I have Scott Surovich. Also 2 decades of experience at a global tier 1 bank, working on multiple engineering teams to include Linux, Windows, virtualization, and for the last 6 years, containers and Kubernetes. He's currently the global container engineering lead and product owner of on-premise Kubernetes at HSBC. You get that right? And he's a co-author and thought leader around Kubernetes, has a book called Kubernetes, an Enterprise Guide. Highly recommend it. I read it myself in order to learn Kubernetes topics past the basics. So if you haven't checked it out, it's highly recommended. So we'll kind of jump right into it today. So the first question I have for you gentlemen is, how do you successfully manage your team members who are maybe new to Kubernetes or not experts yet?
You want to start?
No.
We've had many conversations with this one. Here, if I were to ask anybody, do you have extra people that know Kubernetes? Because if you do, I'd like them, first of all. Because I had 12 openings. It's very challenging. So we went to actually hiring internal people who wants to move. Because we can teach them Kubernetes, and you need somebody that's a geek. Hence why we get on a call, and poor Steven has to sit there for 3 hours, as we don't shut up. So we have a training program, actually. Obviously, we have deals with LinkedIn Education, Google. Most people want to read my book, which I'm uncomfortable always doing at the place I work. And you want to build on something like that? But
Yeah. So when you get someone new into a company, and usually they come with some knowledge, and I think that sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it's actually setting them up to do stuff or to manage the systems not in the best way that organization wants to manage their environments, especially when it comes to Kubernetes, where everything, like every company has their own GitOps pipelines and the way that they authenticate users, like we spoke earlier. So I guess the early knowledge and books and tests and whatever you do online is very important because you get the basics. But then again, you have to get them in line with company policies and what is going on in that company. I think one of the most disturbing thing I saw is that people come with new ideas and start changing the environments or working like they used to on another environment. And that's devastating if you have everything in place already, in my eyes at least.
Absolutely. Key point, like he was mentioning, is we tried contractors for probably 2 years. Teaching them HSBC, you can learn Kubernetes a lot easier. I mean, so HSBC, if you don't know who we are, because we're in the US, we're in 63 countries. We have 250,000 employees, 40,000 IT. My Kubernetes infrastructure on-prem is 3,000 nodes now, roughly. 70,000 containers in that range. 65 different clusters, 4,000 developers. So we have to support that. But the HSBC side is much tougher. So I like getting the geeks inside the bank, and I say, who wants to learn this? And we do have an incubation thing we're setting up. We're trying to train people. So we're trying what we can, because nothing else is working. So.
And just out of curiosity, is there anything that you two did personally when you were learning Kubernetes for the first time that you thought was helpful? Was it reading just the documentation? I know you had kind of a lot of experience around the underlying layers, but how did you learn Kubernetes initially?
So throughout my routes using open source software, and that goes back to SendMail and Apache and
That's an age thing, stop it.
So I think the best thing is to fail. Because when you fail is when you learn the most. If you don't fail, then you're doing nothing. So just put your fingers on the keyboard and start doing stuff. Create clusters, deploy application, make mistakes. If you make mistakes, you know how to fix them. If you don't make mistakes, you're doing something wrong. So that's my recommendation. No test is going to give you what failure will give you.
Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one, because if there's a new product, I typically don't even look at the documentation. I try to spin it up. Because then when I read the documentation, I can go, oh, that's what took me 3 hours. That's my fault. I did it with this, so, although it didn't install easy. When I started Kubernetes, it was about 5 years ago. And as Stephen mentioned, the book, my co-author's in the back there. We became friends and co-authored because I couldn't find anybody to talk to on Kubernetes 5 years ago. And he was on a podcast. So, and he also has a product for OIDC, which we do use. But networking is huge. That's why I love being on LinkedIn, and that's what I can help other people with. So like I've always said, you don't write a book to become rich unless you write fiction or nonfiction, right? An IT book that can live for maybe a year, and then we have to rewrite it. It's a lot of work. But we saw all of those holes in the books. Right? What teaches OIDC? You know, what teaches OAuth? Mark's an expert on it. Going into big products like KGB. So people have a lot more resources now. Kind of jealous. Because back in those days, you might have had Kelsey's the hard way, right? And even that, it was pretty new. So now there's a lot of stuff out there.
All right, next question I have is, how are the banking and financial services needs for Kubernetes development different from other industries?
Because if I sneeze by a server, the regulators want to know why, what tissue, what, do you have a cold? Is it a flu? You know, is it, it's crazy. I was going to say that, but I don't want to offend somebody who thinks it's COVID. Worse than that, 63 countries means 63 different regulatory bodies. And none of them are the same. Some are incredibly strict, not the US. We're actually, depending, like data can stay anywhere with US. I can put US data in the UK. I cannot put UK data in the US. It just doesn't work. And cloud, of course, external, that's a 6-month process. If the wrong app goes out there with the wrong logging, something gets leaked, that's a huge fine. So in my area, security and auditing and making people's lives miserable because of the paperwork, but there's a reason for it. We have to track all that.
Right.
So a lot of people don't like the red tape we have. Again, Mark's learned this as being one of my vendors. You guys are learning this, trying to come in. It's just, it's part of the world. I've been there 20 years. I love working there, but the headaches are definitely part of the world today.
100%.
And every year there's new regulations. Let's not go there.
So yeah, I agree about regulation, and it should be like it's bank, it's your money, right? Everybody's money's there, so you want to keep it safe. That's definitely the most difficult part, but knowing how to work with it and still be functional and provide value in applications, because it's really easy to say let's cut the firewall, but then no users can log into your systems or use your software. And then if you put some of it outside, you need to know what are the differences between an open environment and a closed environment, other than just closing the ports in the firewall, right? And I think the biggest challenge is educating the security personnel about what a system like that would need to stay safe. And there's a lot of commotion right now about security in Kubernetes. Most of it, I think, I'm going to be a little bit extreme here, but most of it is obsolete and coming from the old world, how they used to protect servers, like with CVEs, looking for libraries and binaries that are vulnerable, but who cares? Inside a container, I mean, not who cares, I do care, but if it's not being used, if it's not being exploited, then it's a risk, but it's not an imminent risk. I'd much rather know if someone is trying to do something in real time right now. And that's where security teams, I think, are a little bit behind, because no one is like getting them to where Kubernetes comes in.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. And to that, security has asked me to write the standard for Kubernetes clusters. But I own all the Kubernetes clusters, so I don't know who thinks that's a good idea. I'm just going to take my profile, and that's the standard. So it kind of works well. You never ask a chicken, you know, an ox to watch the hens, you know.
And this is a topic we've spent many hours talking about.
Marvel?
Marvel.
Oh, sorry.
So how effective is monitoring raw data, and how would you gentlemen define a good observability product?
You want to go with it?
No,
Because
you
I have, yeah. In my previous life, I was a consultant, I used to be a consultant for a very big company. And one of the frustrations that I've had is that wherever I went, there was a symptom, I heard about it on the phone. And when I got on site, which was usually abroad, I had to take a flight, they just gave me terabytes of data to look through, and I had to try to find my way in that data and try to understand the timeline of what happened. And after that, the solution is very easy. So raw data is awesome, but in Kubernetes, it can be very big. It is very big to store and to keep. And even finding something in that pile of data is very cumbersome. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and it's really not useful to know what happened to a pod that lived a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So if you don't know what happened in like 30 minutes, you're gonna spend a lot of time speculating probably, because you're not gonna find the problem. Or you might find an indicator to the problem, not really the problem itself.
Like you said, nobody can say Kubernetes is quiet, right? Log files everywhere, there's a million things by hitting a button. So it's tough to go through that. What we do is we want to buy products that are Kubernetes centric. So whether it's a Sosivio, whether it's a Sysdig, that has nice tools. Unfortunately, we're Splunk right now. Don't mind Splunk, but they don't give you any big Kubernetes stuff. You have to create it. And that's a whole skill by itself. You know, logging, monitoring teams. I never want to work on one of those teams because frankly, it's a lot of work. And writing all, prompt SQL, whatever you might be doing. It's just, there's the fun. We still have a kind of a hole there. I can find anybody, but it might take me 4 hours, like we were saying, to say, log 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, now let's pull them in. Let's correlate all the events.
And that's if all the cluster looks the same, right? And where you know what rules you want to put if
Yes.
you're handling it manually. But what happens when you go to a slightly different, with a different CSI or a different CNI cluster, you start getting different problems, different error messages, and there's a lot of them coming through the system. So you need to filter out which ones are important, which one you want to pay attention to. That was very frustrating in my days as a consultant.
Yeah, and if you think about what you want to log, for example. So I own the clusters, I own the security, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to see pod crashes for 500 namespaces, right? That's a nightmare. So now you need a product that can say, okay, namespaces 1, 2, 3 that are owned by the traders go to this Splunk, or this one goes to that Splunk. That's a nightmare, by the way, if anybody's done that. It's a HEC connector for each one, and it just puts a big load on FluentD, which is what Splunk uses. So it's we're still struggling with that. We're big multi-tenant fans, so we got to figure out how to get that kind of logs to the users. And I'm a broken record here, and security guy in the back, and these guys have to code it. The JOT token for people when you log into Kubernetes. You know what namespaces you have access to. I want my vendors to use that to say, cool, you know, Steven's doing something, he's in these 2 groups, 2 namespaces, have this dashboard, only show me 2. Or have Kiali, only show me 2. You know, Kubernetes dashboard 2. So, and it's not a day 2. I hear a lot of people say, that's day 2. If you go into a system without logging on day 2, you've got a huge, you know, vulnerability, right?
Yeah, it has to be from the beginning. Like, you have to start working like that, and whatever product you're using has to go to the developers, the dev personnel, IT people, with those kind of let's call it compartmentalization, because that's what multi-tenancy is all about. If you can see everything that's going on in the cluster, just because product X doesn't have the ability to divide or to separate between users, that's gonna be a problem. Plus, you know, developers don't like someone else looking at them.
No, we've been through that.
Yeah.
They don't like people seeing other metrics,
Right.
let alone. And logging could be a security problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Because even internally, some logs cannot be seen by other people. We have to segment off a bunch of trading and ML that, believe it or not, I build it, and then I don't have access to it. Because I'm not supposed to be able to look at that. So, and then they call me for help, and you gotta try to fix it over the phone. But that kind of stuff does that.
Yeah.
And another monitoring question. This is something that Ron mentioned to me one time, which made me really think about it. It's a good question. He talked about good failures. What are good failures, and how do you differentiate those from bad failures?
Well, the environment is different, as we all know, than the old legacy environment. So in Kubernetes, when something starts to fail, you want it to fail fast as you can. Because you want something else to spin up, and you want that to take the load. And it goes like that for even internally inside an application, and as a platform, as an architecture of how an application or a service to the users will work. So you imagine that happens, or you have an HBA that starts and stops a container, you're gonna get errors because the container runtime daemon doesn't really know that you deliberately stop the container. It's gonna say sandbox deleted and all the rest. You're gonna get some errors there. Especially if the application inside the container is not aware that it's running inside the container, like if you don't have a finalizer or something like that, then it's gonna be terminated, not gracefully, like aggressively. And then you're gonna get error from the application as well. Now, how do you differentiate between just a scale down and a pod crashing? Scale down is actually a good quote unquote failure because you deliberately wanted to scale down, to remove one pod. Whereas a pod crashing, you might lose data or have data corruption. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when something crashes. So that's the biggest, I think, differentiation between that environment in terms of failures, right? And Kubernetes environment and the legacy. In the legacy world, if a process died, you would want to sound the alarm because it shouldn't die. Kubernetes, it's actually a mandatory requirement, scale up and down. And of course, if you find something that doesn't work, like if you cannot reach a database or whatever happens, and it depends on the logic, you want to stop or crash or restart. That's where you have liveness probes. If you're not ready to accept connections, if you're not live, if you can't bind to a port, there's a myriad of reasons. Restart, try again.
So good failure versus bad. I don't know if I think anything's a good failure. But in Kubernetes, as a failure happens, I'm sure you've all seen this, it's a cascading failure. So one thing causes like 5 other things to do something, crash loop, backtrace it. It's like finding a water leak in a roof, right? It's that, you see a leak there, but it's over there where it starts. So that's challenging, but I don't think there's any good errors.
No, it's good in the sense that it's actually coming from the environment. It's not a
I see what
failure
you're saying.
in
More predictive.
Yeah, so
sometimes.
you need to understand if it's something that is happening because the pod got evicted, for example. That will create a lot of errors in the log files. But it's not a bad thing because Kubernetes is actually keeping your cluster safer and healthier. So you don't want to, I guess when we talk about bad and good failures, it's what do you want to sound the alarm about? Do
Yes.
you want every eviction to scream alert, or only if a pod actually fails?
75,000 pods, I don't know.
Right. So that by the way, that's many products that I've been using for I joined Sosivio. You would just open a dashboard or set up an alert, and you just ignore it. Like half an hour later, you just get 1,000 alerts. You don't know which ones to look at. It just becomes useless.
I spoke to someone yesterday who said, I open my dashboard, I see all these alerts, I ignore them, I wait till someone calls me, and I know it's a failure and something serious. That's not the position you really want to be in, but
Definitely.
It's just too much to keep track of now.
It's blinding. It's
Right.
just, you end up just exactly like that. Let's wait for the users, for the ones that are actually using the architecture, the applications, not just a specific code, to call us that they cannot log in or something. And that's a bad position to be in today's world where like failures are not tolerated anymore.
Oh, no. There's no more development. I was telling somebody this yesterday. It's non-profit. Because if developers can't develop, there's a problem. So even my systems that are considered dev are 24/7, tier 0 support. So that goes with this whole visibility in that. I want my developers to see what's broken. And honestly, that's what drove me to talk to these guys in the first place, is I get calls about my container's crashing. It's crash looping. It must be a Kubernetes problem. It's always a Kubernetes problem. Most developers in the bank blame us, And we have a saying that, oh, your toast got burned today. It's an IKP problem. Kubernetes, sorry. We're IKP, so we call ourselves. I want them to go to a dashboard, whether it's Sosivio, anything else, to say, okay, that's out of memory, because they don't know how to find that. You know, most people in this room could probably find that. Go to your describe, go back, look. I have developers that tell me, what's kube control? That is scary. So you want to know how they're deploying YAMLs? The dashboard. And that's my payments team. So we were talking about apps earlier. Payments is on Kubernetes now. There's trillions of dollars a day going through payments for HSBC globally. So tier 0 app that cannot take a delay. So a delay in an actual payment can cost us millions because the regulators hate that. So it can't be slow and it can't go down. And if it does, as a joke, I'll need a job. I am the service owner, that's who goes. So keep my name, anybody, just in case. My co-author won't hire me, so.
On that note, one of my favorite emails I used to get as a consultant from many companies, not just one, was subjected cluster slowness. And that's exactly like 99% random. That's like 5% of the time that there's SDN latency or someone is hacking. But 95% of the time it's just a MongoDB outside that is responding very slow, or a pod that does too much in one function or one API call, and then it takes like 2 seconds to respond, only in very specific scenarios. It happens once a week. But they don't have a way to see it, so the urge is to write an email for IT, because we tested it in many environments, working fine. We get a response in 20 milliseconds, now it takes 5 seconds. So it has to be something in the environment, and it's not. It's just never have been tested in a chaotic environment like production. Like that's bias versus variance 101.
Yeah. Totally agree.
How we doing on time, Brennan? I got one more question. So this is around storage. How would you effectively manage storage for a growing environment?
I just did a talk last night at Portworx thing, so it was a good together. I have a session at 3:15 today about storage with NetApp and DreamWorks and some other people. So to me, 4 years ago, I wanted storage on Kubernetes. I thought it should be a standard, everybody should have it. I'm a big fan of taking monoliths over. They all have benefits. Don't get me wrong, refactor is awesome. We have 8,000 apps. We're not refactoring those. We have 8,000 apps home written. This isn't bought. And probably 30% less staff than wrote those. So that's not happening anytime soon. So to move those over, I can do something like Anthos Migrate or other tools and make it a container. But I need storage. So you gotta go with, I'm not a fan of CSI storage. So when I say that, like Portworx has a CSI version, a non-CSI version. The non-CSI version has more features. It's just better. Nothing wrong with CSI, we just don't want it. Performance is lower. So you need a product, and you need a supported product. That's a key point for me. I can again get a fine for products that don't have support. So if it's tier 0, and it goes down, say 4 hours, the regulators come in and say, okay, who can you call? If I tell them a GitHub issues, we're getting fined. We need to escalate that. So a lot of people ask the bank, why aren't you open sourcing everything? I can't. Not all open source has support. All I have to do is somebody say we support it, I'm good. It could be $1. I just need somebody that says, yes, I can go up here. And we do that with our OIDC. So again, Mark over there, open source, but I can't have it go down. So we pay for the users to use it. So I think storage with databases this year, it was supposed to be the year of databases. And everybody has a database offering. Portworx has data services. They give you Postgres, they give you Mongo, they give you NewODB, and all in a click. So we have not gone that route yet. We do Postgres only, but we are going to get more into that. And you need storage for it. And you need something like a Portworx or a Longhorn or anything that supports it. And wait, let's not forget about this. People think persistent data only. Payments is Kafka based. Anybody play with Kafka? Ever see the logs for Kafka? About 4 hours, they can be like 30 terabytes. I mean, depending what you're doing. The payment system, again, trillions all the time going through it. So at one point they had a container, we had one Kafka running. It filled up the 300 gigs on that in about 10 minutes. And the overlay file system. So of course, what happens at 80%? You get evictions. So it was just all random. So we do temporary space. So we do scratch space using Portworx and say, okay, put your logs here, please, because you're gonna crash everybody. And it's hard to stop that. You can do it in a resource quota, you can do ephemeral space, but you have to know what they need. And every container's different sizes. It's challenging, it's a lot of fun. That's why I like my job. A lot of headaches, but you learn something new every day. At least I do.
Yeah, I definitely agree about the different usages of storage in a container world. Personally, I don't want to have any storage, but as Scott just mentioned, you
Here
gotta
comes
have
the fight.
No. Most of the time I would agree. Well, probably on most applications, because they are legacy applications. Rebuilding them it's not even an option in most cases, at least not in a timely manner. It's gonna take years until you migrate everything. So you gotta have some storage. I do agree that if you can put it outside, like have a database outside or a different way of sending the data outside the cluster without using a persistent volume, like with a network connection, that's better in most cases. But there are a lot of cases that an application really needs a local storage. And the alternative to using a CSI is that developers end up writing inside the container, and I think that's the worst thing that.
Well, if you do non-CSI with Portworx, you still don't do that, just handled differently.
You can do an empty dir, but then you're writing on the node.
Well, yeah, but, so there's two versions of products, so to get into this, but the CSI version and a non-CSI, it still works the same, but you're not limited to just the CSI feature that goes into Kubernetes. And the in-tree CSI, I wouldn't use it right now.
The which one?
In-tree, it comes with it, basically, I'm sorry. So, that's why they like Portworx or Astra DS by NetApp, same thing, they have a non-CSI version. Most of the big vendors do.
But you still have to use the PVs, right?
You do, it's still PVCs, it's still PVs, it's just, you get more features.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about, like, OpenEBS was a huge thing, or still is a huge thing. There was Longhorn.
Ceph, I mean.
Ceph is awesome, but it's
Oh, you're right,
very
I
high
forgot.
maintenance. It's very high maintenance, like it's very.
It's storage.
No, but it's high maintenance on IT people, not on
That's true.
storage people.
That's
Like,
true.
It's SDS. Gluster was awesome. I don't know why not a lot of people are using it today. Personally, my favorite, maybe because we don't really require any storage, but if we do, to store some temporary data, it really depends on the usage, but I would use like anything NFS based. I don't care where it comes from, just because it's faster, easier,
Yeah, but-
and we can delete it very quickly.
You'd have to use the open source NFS provision.
Yeah.
And it works, it works. So I'll go back real quick on the storage. Payments guys know, our trading platform, again, we're a bank. Traders are pretty important, they make the money. They're moving all of their MQ to a monolith that's running hot using storage that's replicated. It's gonna save them 75 cores a year just by moving that one app into Kubernetes, an app that some people never would have put in there because it's MQ. I mean, it's a monolith. And they're pulling it over and it runs quicker, it's more stable, and it saves them money. That's the big thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean,
We have to. Everything's about saving money at the bank, right? Technology's great, but what does it save you?
And how stable it is.
Yes.
Because data is right.
Yeah, I don't sleep well at night since payments went on. Like I said, oh.
Gentlemen, thank you. That was the last question. For sure.
Thank you.
Talk about
Thank you.
Marvell now?
Yeah, we talk about Marvel, we talk about music.
Okay, it's Marvel trivia time. Everybody else go. I was told this would be full contact. So when you were.
We're waiting for the lake to freeze over and then we're gonna go around.
Oh, that's cool. Cool.
Play
Gives you some
hockey.
sticks. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm
looked
in.
at the weather this morning and it's 32 degrees, so it should happen any second now.
You're in Detroit, man. It's as bad as Buffalo. Which I'm from Buffalo, by the way. Sorry. So.
Thank you guys, that was,
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.